interviewing skills.
I'm going to talk about a few things to think about as it relates to interviewing. And I'll be doing another video in the future that will really get into detail of some of the very specific things as it relates to interviews.
Be sure to do your homework.
Let's say I'm going to meet with a potential client. I will go on their website, in advance of the meeting. I will research the company. I will find out as much as I can about their business, what's going on with them, all of those kinds of things. And then when I go into the meeting, I'm prepared. And they're impressed that I've done that work, and I can talk about, my observations about their company and so forth. What's really astonishing and quite honestly disappointing is when candidates show up for interviews and they haven't done that kind of homework on the company. They haven't looked at the website. They haven't read the job description in detail. They haven't done, again, their homework. I was once interviewing someone to work for me at my company. And so I said, well, I'm sure you're familiar with, with what I do. And this person said, well, I actually haven't had time to go through the website and some of the information. So could you walk me through that right now? I mean, obviously that person didn't get the job. You don't want to be that person. You want to be the person that stands out, and preparation is key.
Telephone interview tips.
Interviewing is also really different in today's environment. And usually in the job search process today, it doesn't start with an in-person interview. Most job seekers that I talk with, and as well as candidates that I work with, it starts with a phone interview. So you need to be prepared for phone interviews, for video interviews, as well as in-person interviews. And there's different tips and tools and techniques to be successful with those. I mean, the great thing about phone interviews is you can have all of your notes and your paperwork and everything in front of you, and you can be really prepared to provide robust questions. And if you get nervous, you can look around and look for the answers, and again, be really prepared.
Video interviews.
Video interviews can be a little tricky because most people aren't in front of a video camera often. So whether you're doing it on Skype, where you might be sitting at your home office, or maybe you're going to a video place where they're setting up the video interview with the hiring company, there's different things to think about there as well. For example, you really have to think about what you have in front of you on the table. I mean, how are things appearing in the camera? And you can test those things in advance. The other thing is to be really cognizant of little things you might be doing that could be picked up by the sound. For example, once I was doing a video interview with someone and they were tapping their pencil on the edge of the table, and I heard more of the pencil tapping than I could of what they were saying. Another tip for video interviews is when you're talking, you might start looking at notes and your head's down like this. And what are you seeing right now? You're seeing the top of my head, and what you want to see is someone's face and their smile and their personality and all of that.
Get ready for your in-person interview.
There's a lot of prep work that goes into in-person interviews. You should be thinking, what's the 24-hour countdown to the interview and all of the steps that go into that? Do you have all of the things that you need to take with you to the interview? And then when you get there, how do you ensure that you have an interview? I call it acing the interview. And a lot of that comes from preparing for questions. And
be prepared for tough questions.
Everybody knows that you're going to be asked a question that's like a negative that people are trying to turn into a positive. It's that question of, what's one of your developmental areas, or give me an example of a time you made a mistake, or something like that. So if you know you're going to be asked some of those questions, then be prepared for them. Don't be one of the candidates that's sitting there going, I don't really know. Sometimes when I ask the question, tell me about a time you've made a mistake, I've had so many people look me in the eye and say, I've never made a mistake. And I say, really? Well, I think you might be making one now. I say that inside my head. But we know everyone's made a mistake. And what people are trying to gauge from those questions is, how self-aware are you? How willing are you, and how able are you to talk about some of the things that aren't so great, some of the things where you need to try harder, things that you need to do better. So don't get tripped up by those questions. And there's a list of them that I talk about on my blog. I talk about them in my book of things that you can prepare for in advance so that you can ace the interview.
What not to do.
Okay, some of the things not to do in your job search. Well, I had a candidate once tell me that he usually lies in his interviews about whether or not he's employed, but he decided not to lie to me in the interview that I was in. So that was a deal breaker. I had a candidate where I asked this person what made them a really good controller, and their response was, "Why would you ask me a question like that?" I was like, "Well, because I'm curious what you think you're good at." And then we ended the interview, and this person called me back and said, "I was really taken aback by that question and just not prepared on why you would want to know what I think is good about my work." And I found that, really odd. I once called a candidate to give them feedback. They had gone to an interview, and the client was really happy and so forth. And when they picked up the phone, they said, "Can I put you on hold because I'm right in the middle of watching So You Think You Can Dance?" And I kind of chuckled, and then they really did put me on hold. So that would be something not to do. I phone interviewed someone once. It just didn't go well for a number of reasons. And the candidate called my assistant back and explained that they had just finished meditating and their energy level was low and wanted to know if I could redo the interview and they would not meditate in advance so they could make sure that their chi, I guess, was where they wanted it to be.